Online spaces, notably Google, are for sure de-amplifying universally independent media content that's covering your party's campaign. What that will do, of course, initially, is it will mean that the messaging that's somewhat favorable or at least sympathetic to the new alliance that's coalescing around you, Trump, Tulsi, Bobby Kennedy, it means fewer people will see it, obviously. But secondarily, independent media content creators are dependent on the revenue. So they will select against making this content ultimately. When we used to make content on like sort of Trump events, we would see like sort of spikes, particularly if there was an event. Now they're clearly de-amplifying it. So people will start to make different types of content. It's a cynical little world out there. So that I see as a real strangle and choke on this type of content.
And I think, Russell, that last point you made, it's actually a really interesting observation. It is a profound point because I think worry very much rightly about the way human beings at these tech companies are training their AI and their algorithms. But the last step that you just identified is actually the most devious of all. It's the way the AI and the algorithms are actually training the human beings. So the ultimate AI in this is the incentive structure you create for, as you said, independent journalism, content creators whose revenue models depend on what is or is not amplified or monetized. So in some ways, it's the human beings at the tech companies that have trained the algorithms. One of the things the tech companies learn, let me just walk through the cascade here. In the last several years, they've learned that actually outright censoring, outright banning, outright locking accounts isn't a good thing for them to do. Not just because it's morally wrong or because it's anti-American or runs against their stated principles of supporting a free internet. Not just for those reasons, but pragmatically, it's a bad idea for them because it creates a level of public ire, potential headlines that later follow. And so they've realized the way to carry out censorship is not through bans, not through terminating accounts. That was the sloppy way they used to do it way back in the Stone Ages of 2020. The way they do it now is almost exclusively through amplification or suppression of the desired forms of content being amplified, whereas the undesired forms are de-amplified, if not outright censored. It is a form of censorship, but this allows them to call it something other than censorship. Now, then the next step in the cascade is, okay, if they've done it that way, is it human beings doing this? The answer to that question is no, because again, they're too smart for that. Human beings doing it as individuals, that was again back in the Flintstone age of the 2020s. In the postmodern age of 2024, the way they do it is, no, it's just the algorithms that do it. Well, now, how are those algorithms trained? They're trained by the biases set into motion. It's like if the creator launched the Big Bang, we can talk about the existence of God and what the Big Bang has to do with that later. But the analogy here is the creator of those algorithms is actually just a human being that set it into motion, but then watches it do whatever it does for the public to believe is independently. Now that AI has been permanently trained by those biases, what's the final way to close that loop? The entire incentive structure, I mean, capitalism is a form of AI. You could think about it in that context, at least. They use the combination of that AI and capitalism, human incentives for people who make money through creating content and distributing it independently, to train them on what types of content they are or aren't supposed to create, not by censoring them anymore, but by training them using the financial incentives of amplification or shadow banning and throttling as a backdoor mechanism for now than having solved the problem. So then fast forward 4 years from now, you don't even need the technology companies to intervene because the system has already been trained on what types of incentives are rewarded for creating what kind of content and what kind of content or information isn't rewarded. And that's exactly what they're playing for. So I thought that was a really astute observation, but I just wanted to take a minute to really break it down because once you see it, you can't unsee it. It's part of the reason I still do things like write books. I mean, the reason I wrote this most recent book, I actually talk about some of these very themes of the more covert threats to free speech that are less overt, but in some ways they're more dangerous. And this, in the latest book, I think that was a focus area of mine because I think this is a hot theme right now, affecting and impacting even potentially the result of this upcoming election. And the more alert we are to it, the less likely it is to actually have its intended effect.
I noted that some of the cultural governmental departments and groups that manage AI that were involved in the stories and maneuvering subsequent to the attacks I received personally in September last year were meeting with the Biden and Kamala campaign in your country, recently. It's precisely the manipulation and management of online content, de-amplification, forms of shadow banning, populating comments with bots, ensuring that certain stories aren't proliferated, that these organizations engage in, creating stories that legitimize smears and legitimize censorship. It seems to be part of the overall playbook, and it's one that's been used, I would say, profligately during the COVID period. Various individuals, Bhattacharya, Pierre Corey, Robert Malone, anyone, McCulloch, anyone that was outspoken, most notably and famously Joe Rogan. But what we're seeing now is its use in electoral cycles. And what I suppose the end point of it becomes, Vivek, is ontological. It seems like if 10 years ago, and it's almost difficult to imagine the alternate universe in the incessant blizzard of data that we all live in, if like figures as distinct as you, Tulsi Gabbard, Donald Trump, Bobby Kennedy were all part of one political party, you would have to regard that as anti-establishment. In your case, I'm referring to your anti-bureaucratic stance. I loved how on Jordan Peterson you described how you would strip government departments once in office, and that was an area of expertise and experience that you'd be able to deploy. Then you think of the experience of environmentalism and medical malpractice that Bobby Kennedy brings, Tulsi Gabbard's military experience. I'm still astonished by, say, intellectual liberals, who some of whom I stay in touch with, and I still read their content really to understand what the purview is, are able to say, like I saw recently a celebrity endorsement of Kamala Harris saying that if you believe in democracy, you have to vote for Kamala Harris and Tim Walz because of the terrible project 2025. We can't continue to bring you this beautiful content without the support of our partners. We can't continue to bring you this awakening and hopefully enjoyable content without the support of our partners. That's why I've got to ask you, and I'm glad to ask you, are you struggling with back taxes or unfiled returns? The IRS is escalating collections, adding, get this, 20,000 new agents and sending over 5 million collection letters to kick off 2024 to spend on things that you probably don't agree with, like wars and measures and a total lack of infrastructure. In these challenging times, your best defense is Tax Network USA. Don't let the IRS take advantage of you. With over 14 years of experience, Tax Network USA have saved their clients over $1 billion in back taxes. No matter the size of your tax issue, their expertise is your advantage. They specialize in negotiating with the IRS, aiming to significantly reduce your debt. Tax Network USA doesn't just negotiate, they also protect your assets from IRS seizures and manage your yearly returns for ongoing compliance. Importantly, they are licensed to help you with all state tax issues, regardless of where you live in the United States. The clock is ticking. Don't wait as the IRS steps up its game. Seize control of your financial future now. Contact Tax Network USA for immediate relief and expert guidance. Visit taxnetworkusa.com/brand. Don't let tax issues overpower you. Turn to Tax Network USA and find your path to financial peace of mind. Right, let's get back to this content. The management of the information sphere is becoming extraordinarily adept, and other than outliers like our platform Rumble and Elon Musk's X, there is a complete management of information that means that something that I would say at the beginning of this campaign, even though you're from a capitalist and entrepreneurial and somewhat libertarian, you tell me what you are, perspective, it seems like anti-establishment, and Bobby Kennedy in the way that I've described is anti-establishment, I would have thought it very unlikely that you guys would be campaigning together. So in a sense, doesn't that show that there's an emergent anti-establishment consensus? And how can the sort of liberal, centrist globalists maintain this kind of narrative that they are the outsiders and we've got to turn the page and we've got to fight against this established? I don't understand how they can manage it.
Yeah. It's interesting. There's a funny dynamic. I'm enjoying this conversation, Russell, because your insights are spot on here. The only thing I would say is I don't think you're ever going to see a political party represent that, because the nature of being anti-establishment or the nature of having an independent streak is remaining independent, right? And so, here are things that are true about the likes of some of the people you mentioned, from Tulsi, Bobby, myself. We don't agree with 100% of what each other think. We don't agree with 100% of what Donald Trump thinks, and we're not afraid to say it. But actually what we are against is the rise of this managerial class and this machine that in some ways is managing not just the government, unelected bureaucrats managing the government. They're managing every sphere of our lives, right? From corporate America to our universities to nonprofits. It's the bureaucratic class, the committee class, the managerial class that effectively is protecting its own continued existence at the expense of the institution they're supposed to safeguard. And in the government, that's the case of representative democracy. So part of the imbalance here in what we have going against us, if you will, in an anti-establishment current, is that just by our very nature, we're not wired to form a political party with structure around that current, because create a new establishment and that would create a new layer of bureaucracy and a managerial class. And that's in some sense what we find antipathic. But it's also, I think, what makes this movement in this moment that much more powerful, because I think people across the country, and even people who you'd call former liberal intellectuals, some of them at least, and I think even the others, I hope there's an awakening still yet ahead. You've seen movement where I think people agree in this country that I may not want the policy that some congressman votes for, but I'd still want it to be the people we elect to run the government, for God's sake, to be the ones who actually run the government and make the decisions, rather than somebody who I could never fire at the ballot box. That's just what it means to live in a constitutional republic. It's what it means to live in a representative democracy. I may not agree with a heinous opinion that's expressed on Rumble or on Facebook or on X or on TikTok, but I still believe in the right of the person there to express it, because if I don't, that means that tomorrow it's going to be my opinion that's suppressed when the same shoe fits the other foot. So I think those principles, so what we're seeing, what you call anti-establishment, and I think it's a fine word, but there can be different kinds of establishments at different times. I call maybe more of a principles-based rather than a politics or partisan-based, or first principles-based movement. To say, just what are the basic rules of the road, right? We might each drive different cars on that road. You know, it's every one of the individuals you mentioned, from Bobby to Tulsi to Donald Trump, we'll spar and disagree. I'll spar and disagree with them on a wide range of topics. Those are like different cars you might ride on the road, okay? But we're not talking about which car you're designing on the road. Right now, we're in a moment, we're talking about the basic rules of the road itself. And we are deeply aligned on those basic rules of the road. We believe in free speech. We believe in self-governance. We believe in merit. We believe in reviving a sense of pride and identity that we're missing. And we're against totalitarian overreach. We're against the culture of censorship. We're against the suppression and silencing of even our own opponents. Those are rules of the road. We're against the assault on religion, stand for the free exercise of religion. And I think that that's one of those moments. That's part of why I say it's more of a 1776 moment right now. I know you come from the other side of the pond, so with all due respect, you know, I mean this in a very American-centric sense, a 1776 moment in our own country, where this isn't about, you know, bickering over the tax rate being 1% higher or 1% lower, and you know we may have our disagreements between the parties on that. This election isn't about that. It's about the basic rules of the road. And you know, as Orwell once said, the best way to actually control a society is to first control its language. That's what you see from the other side, where they've owned the message of protecting our democracy. When you think about what's a threat to democracy, a threat to democracy is telling your political opponents they can't speak. A threat to democracy is saying that the people who run the government aren't actually the ones who we elect to run the government, aren't the ones who run the government. There's no doubt in anybody's mind that Joe Biden is not in any sense running as the president of the United States today. He's not functioning as the president of the United States today. Nobody in America believes that he is, and yet we hold out this artifice that he's actually the U.S. president. So that I think represent real threats to democracy, not the histrionics that we hear. Part of the problem is, you know, we as human beings, we always do. We always have. It's our nature. We fall for narratives that are sold to us. But there's also a part of us that hungers to rebel against those narratives. And so this anti-establishment current that you're describing, our duty, our job right now is to awaken the side of each of us that wants to reject what we're force-fed rather than just swallowing it. And every human being, every one of us has both impulses in us. The question of the leaders of this new movement is, how are we going to awaken the rebellious instincts at a moment where the future of our country depends on it? And that's what I'm trying to do my best on in the next few weeks and months left.
To your point on Orwellianism and the capture of language, I was speaking with Michael Schellenberger yesterday, and he said that one of the ways that I think it was X was being condemned with regard to possibly the election or possibly COVID. X was being condemned for its aggressive neutrality. I thought, wow, aggressive neutrality. That would not even work linguistically. Just a little while ago, the world is changing fast. Hey, thanks for watching. If you want to see more uncensored content where free speech can flourish, join our live stream. Click the link right here to watch the next video if you want to, or become a member of a growing movement. Download the Rumble app and you'll be informed every time we make a new piece of content. Stay free.